The sky was split open with screaming drones. My property, my land, was crawling with strangers in pastel dresses, clinking champagne flutes like they owned the place. Folding chairs dug deep into the earth I'd raised my children on. My irrigation line was crushed under the wheels of a rented catering van. And at the center of it all was her, Karen, standing at the altar she'd erected without permission, officiating a wedding she hadn't even asked to host on my land. That would have been outrageous enough. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had 30 trained battle eagles nesting just beyond the tree line, and they don't like trespassers. Who the hell holds a wedding on someone else's land? Without asking? I first noticed something was off when a pair of rental trucks rumbled past the edge of my property line on a Thursday afternoon, clouds of red dust billowing behind them like some cheap parade of suburban invasion. I live 30 minutes outside the city for a reason. Peace, quiet, and the privilege of watching the sun rise over my grandfather's orchard, the same one he planted by hand after coming home from the war, one sapling at a time, with calloused fingers and a back bent from promise. That land is sacred. My grandfather raised 3 generations of us under the weight of those branches. So when I saw 2 men in matching polos hammering tent stakes into the soil not 50 feet from the old cedar stump he carved our family initials into, my blood ran cold. I walked over, boots crunching through gravel and memory, and asked what they were doing. "Setting up for the ceremony," one of them said without looking up. Karen said this was the staging site. Karen, the HOA president with a smile that smelled like lawsuits and lavender, who once fined a man for putting solar panels on the wrong side of his roof. I didn't even live in her neighborhood. My property predates the HOA by decades. I'm outside their jurisdiction and always have been. That's why I bought out the last 5 acres on this side of the ridge, to make damn sure no one could say otherwise. At first, I thought maybe this was a mistake. Some event company misread a permit. A GPS glitch. A hiccup in bureaucracy. It wasn't. The next morning I woke up to a row of orange traffic cones stretched across my driveway like a plastic picket fence. A printed sign, laminated and zip-tied to a stake, read, "Private wedding access only HOA authorized vehicles." My name was nowhere on it. My property wasn't even listed. That's when I noticed the tire tracks, deep ruts carved across the north field where they'd set up a generator and 2 oversized tents. My pasture, where my son used to run around with a kite and my dogs still play fetch. The fence was down, the gate left wide open. And Karen, smack in the middle of it all, was standing there directing volunteers like a damn general, clipboard in one hand, a venti iced latte in the other. I didn't lose my temper. Not yet. I walked up to her, slow and calm. "Karen," I said, "what the hell is going on here?" She turned to me with that rehearsed pageant smile, the one she saves for local reporters and county planning board meetings. "Oh, Mark, we were wondering if you'd swing by. Don't worry, the trucks will be gone by Sunday. We're just using the far end of the property for the ceremony." "This is my property," I said flatly. "Not land. You're trespassing." Her smile didn't move. "Oh, we ran it by the board," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard like she was granting me an audience. "There was an open comment period last month. Didn't you receive the notice?" I didn't say anything. She knew damn well I wasn't on the HOA mailing list. I wasn't part of her kingdom, and she didn't like that. "We assumed no objections meant consent," she added with a faux apologetic shrug. "Anyway, it's only temporary, and honestly, we're doing you a favor. The whole event is being catered by Haven Hearth should help boost your property value." I almost laughed. Like a flock of strangers stomping over 80-year-old roots and pouring champagne into plastic flutes near my grandfather's orchard was a gift. I looked past her and saw what they'd done. The white vinyl gazebo, newly assembled, had been planted right beside the pond where my dad used to fish before he passed, fairy lights strung from branches like cheap jewelry on a corpse. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows, already bowing under the weight of people who didn't belong. I tried to keep my voice steady. "You didn't ask. You didn't notify me. You have no legal right to be here." Karen's eyes twinkled with the kind of malice that comes dressed as politeness. "It's for the community," she said, like that made it sacred. "You have so much space out here, it just makes sense. And besides, the bride is Councilman Blake's niece. You wouldn't want to embarrass her, would you? My silence was answer enough. She turned back to her clipboard. If you're concerned about liability, I'm sure we can add you to the insurance rider. And just like that, I was dismissed. Not as a homeowner, not even as a human being, just an obstacle, a formality, an inconvenience to be nodded at and ignored. I called the sheriff's department that afternoon. Explained the trespass, the unauthorized use, the damages to my field and fencing. The deputy who answered said it sounded like a civil matter and suggested I reach out to the HOA board first to de-escalate. I hung up without saying a word, because what was the point? Karen's people had already closed the loop. That weekend, it got worse. Strangers showed up in clusters, parking on my land like it was some public lot. SUVs and luxury sedans lined the edge of the orchard, wheels digging into soil my grandfather turned by hand. Someone dumped buckets of ice into the pond. A kid kicked over my grandfather's tool shed marker, the one we turned into a little shrine after he died. I found plastic confetti in the chicken coop, and every time I tried to intervene, Karen played dumb. "Oh dear," she'd say. "I'll have the volunteers move the cars. So sorry about that. You really should have come to the planning meeting." That Sunday, I found her standing on the old dock in a flowing white linen wrap, giving what appeared to be a pre-rehearsal tour to two people with clipboards and walkie-talkies. When I approached, she actually had the gall to wave me off mid-sentence. "We're on a tight timeline," she said, as if I was a vendor late on delivery. "If you're worried about the pond, it'll be back to normal in a few days." "You're draining it," I said. She looked down at the hose snaking into the water and laughed. "Well, we have to get rid of the algae if the swan boat's going to float properly. Honestly, Mark, this negativity doesn't look good on you." That was when I stopped arguing. Stopped trying to get her to acknowledge the line she'd crossed. Because I realized Karen wasn't trying to get away with anything, she genuinely believed this land was hers to commandeer. That my silence was a courtesy, not restraint. That my family's soil, sweat, and legacy were just another rustic backdrop for her HOA fairy tale. And worst of all, she thought I was powerless to stop her. The next week was a masterclass in coordinated bureaucratic siege. I tried to do it the right way. I really did. I printed out the satellite overlays, parcel maps from the county assessor's office, and copies of my deed that clearly marked the boundaries of my land, all certified and notarized. I mailed a cease and desist letter to the HOA headquarters, if you can call Karen's kitchen table a headquarters, and I emailed a scanned copy to the board with legal citations in bold. I didn't want drama. I wanted peace, respect, some semblance of sanity. But the moment that envelope hit their mailbox, Karen went full scorched earth. That night, a city code enforcement officer showed up at my property. Not the county deputy I'd spoken to last week, but someone from the zoning department who looked uncomfortable just stepping onto my porch. "We received an anonymous tip that your outbuilding might be violating setback codes," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Which outbuilding?" I asked. "You'll have to be more specific. I've got a barn, a tool shed, a chicken coop, and a converted workshop that used to be my grandfather's peach sorting room." "The workshop," he muttered. "There's concern it's too close to the Greenbelt easement." I laughed. Not a big laugh, not a hearty one. Just a short, bitter exhale of disbelief. There is no easement. This entire parcel predates the HOA by over 60 years. He shifted on his feet, eyes flicking down to his clipboard. "Well, according to the updated maps on file with the association, this area is now designated for shared community use." "According to the association," I repeated flatly. He nodded. "They submitted an annexation adjustment last quarter. I have the document if you'd like to see it." He handed me a copy of a photocopied plat map, overlaid with red marker lines and the HOA logo watermarked in the corner, like it meant something. It was fake. Poorly edited too, the kind of amateur job someone does in Microsoft Paint and prints out with boldness instead of legality. I called my lawyer the next morning. She confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no legal jurisdiction over my property, but the county's bureaucracy was slow and Karen's machinery was fast. By the time we filed an official complaint to halt their use of my land, I came home to find 3 industrial-grade portable toilets parked right in front of my workshop. Not along the easement, not near the road. Dead center in my gravel path, blocking access to my own damn tools. A laminated sign hung from the first one. Bride, groom only. Please do not disturb. I snapped a photo, time-stamped it, and sent it to the zoning office. No response. I sent it to the health department, noting there was no visible sewage containment line. No reply. That afternoon, a white van labeled Rustic Reflections Event Rentals pulled into my pasture and began unloading bales of decorative hay, wrought iron candle stands, and 2 ornate fountains. I stood at the edge of the field and watched as they unpacked, mouths moving in cheerful oblivion, as if they were installing centerpieces for a garden gala and not staging a full-scale invasion. When I walked over and asked what they thought they were doing, the driver simply said, "We're just the delivery guys. Karen said this was approved and ready for setup. You'll have to talk to her." I tried again, another call to the sheriff's office, another recorded statement. But this time, the deputy who came out was different. Younger, maybe early 30s, with a tight fade and mirrored sunglasses he didn't bother removing. He listened politely, nodded when I explained the trespassing and forgery, and then casually flipped his notepad shut. "From what I understand, this land is still in dispute," he said. "Karen provided us documentation that indicates shared access was granted via HOA authority." "It's not in dispute," I said. "That's forged." "Well," he shrugged, "that's a civil issue, not a criminal one. You'll need to take it to court. So until then," I said slowly, "they can just keep building?" He paused, as if he didn't want to answer. "I'm not here to interpret land use law. I'm here to maintain the peace." That night, I got slapped with a 500 citation in the mail. Noise violation. Apparently, the generator I used to power my barn tools exceeded the decibel limit for community harmony after 7 p.m. My barn, my generator, on my land. Karen wasn't just playing dirty, she was rewriting the playbook. I received a follow-up letter 2 days later stating that continued disruption or attempts to interfere with the HOA's scheduled event may be subject to civil penalty and removal. She included a formal HOA seal at the top of the page, which I'm almost certain she printed from Google Images. And the kicker? At the bottom, in tiny italics, "The community appreciates your cooperation in creating a memorable experience for the bride and groom." I should have expected what came next. I really should have. But even I wasn't ready for the audacity. I walked out to my pasture one morning, coffee in hand, dogs still half asleep at my heels, and noticed something off. The ground near the orchard was damp. Not dew, not rain. I followed the trail and found a hose spliced into my irrigation line. Someone had run a splitter valve off the underground pipe, leading into 2 massive vinyl tubes that snaked into the woods toward the pond area. I followed them and found the fountains. Installed. Running. The same ones the delivery guys had dropped off. My well water was feeding them. I turned the valve shut and cut the hose with a pair of bolt cutters. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. Out of self-preservation. Within an hour, Karen was on my porch. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She just showed up in a crisp white blouse and a mouth full of outrage. "You vandalized our equipment," she barked, waving her phone like a sword. "I've reported you to the board." "It's my water," I said. My plumbing." She scoffed. "You don't own the aquifer. That water crosses community lines. That makes it public utility." "You're insane, and you're being extremely unneighborly," she snapped. "You have no idea how much work we've put into this. The bride's parents are flying in from out of state. Do you really want to be the man who ruined her day because of some dusty patch of dirt?" That was the moment I realized Karen didn't see my land as land. She saw it as a stage, a scenic backdrop, a photo op, something disposable, valuable only for the aesthetics it offered. I was no longer a homeowner in her eyes. I was an obstacle, a prop, a barn-shaped inconvenience. That night, I got a letter hand-delivered. Not mailed, not emailed. Delivered. A young man, maybe 17, looking like he wanted to vanish into his own hoodie, handed it to me and mumbled, "They said you have to read this." Then he bolted before I could ask a single question. The letter was printed on thick, watermarked stock and sealed in a gold-trimmed envelope. Inside, an official-looking document titled Preliminary HOA Enforcement Action. It claimed I had violated Section 3.17 of the Community Charter, obstruction of communal access, and warned that if I continued interfering with the administration of HOA-sanctioned events, they would seek an emergency injunction. Failure to comply, it read, may result in legal consequences up to and including forced removal of obstructions. Obstructions. They were referring to me, to my fences, my workshop. My protest signs I'd hung near the orchard. I folded the letter slowly and slipped it into the drawer with the others. I didn't rage, I didn't scream. But I did walk to the edge of the field, past the crushed gate, past the broken pipe, past the vendor tents now blinking with fairy lights. And I stood there, in the dark, silent, still, watching. Because if they thought they'd broken me, they were wrong. They hadn't broken me. They'd awoken something I'd buried. They'd stepped into land they didn't understand. And they were about to meet what lies beyond the edge of the greenbelt. The moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with arrogance, but with organized, sanctioned delusion, was when Karen filed for a temporary restraining order on me, the man whose land she was actively trespassing on. The paperwork showed up in a manila envelope, tucked under my gate latch like a peace offering soaked in acid, filed with the county court. Her claim? That I had threatened HOA volunteers and endangered community safety with livestock and wildlife activity, and that I was creating an environment of hostility that could jeopardize the sanctity of an imminent matrimonial celebration. I read that last line 3 times. Sanctity. Matrimonial celebration. These weren't just rental tents and fairy lights anymore. This was now being pitched as some sacred community-blessed union, and I was the monster ruining it all. I walked straight into the barn and unlocked the hidden door. Behind it, past the feed bins and old post diggers, was a long row of perches, 30 in total, each occupied, each with 2 glowing eyes that tracked me like I was prey. I whistled once, low, familiar, and in response, feathers stirred and wings tightened. These weren't pets. These weren't showbirds. These were trained apex predators, battle eagles, certified for environmental pest control and falconry exhibitions under state and federal regulation. Legally owned, fully permitted, and deeply, genetically motivated to annihilate anything they deemed a threat. I'd been raising them since I retired from the Wildlife Operations Unit 6 years ago. And not one HOA clause, not one neighborhood fine, not one smug clipboard-wielding suburban dictator could erase that. Most people don't know this, but bald eagles can be trained. Not like dogs. Not with obedience and treats, but with ritual, precision, territory. They understand space, what is theirs, what is not, and what happens when something crosses the line. That line was Karen, and she had crossed it with both arms waving. So I got to work. First, the prep. I went through the aviary, tightened the enclosure cables, checked each bird's jesses and telemetry harness. I activated the GPS trackers linked to my satellite uplink and loaded fresh batteries into the leg beacon units. These weren't just for tracking, they were for signal, range direction, flock cohesion, tactical release. Everything was mapped. I had blueprints of the property, topographical scans from my drone. I marked wind corridors, thermal drafts, and tree line cover. Then I checked the breach sensors. Every inch of the old orchard had been equipped with proximity detectors, originally designed to keep coyotes out, but now calibrated to ping any movement within the event perimeter. I built a HUD overlay from my laptop, feeding visuals from the eagle's harness cams directly into my field monitor. I watched in real time as they circled in their pens, unaware of the chaos to come, but ready in the way only predators can be. Next came the legal shield. I sent my cousin Mia, an environmental lawyer based out of Denver, the entire folder. Photos, footage, witness statements. A breakdown of the forged documents Karen had been passing off to vendors and the sheriff's office alike. Within 12 hours, she'd drafted a 10-page cease and desist letter citing federal wetland protections, wildlife endangerment statutes, and illegal use of private property for commercial events. We submitted it through formal channels to the county clerk and sent certified copies to the HOA's listed address. They ignored it. Of course they did. Because at this point, Karen wasn't just dismissing my rights. She was convincing herself that she had some divine mandate. The wedding wasn't just an event anymore. It was a crusade. 3 days before the wedding, I spotted a full catering truck pull in through the back gate. Yes, my gate. And begin unloading crates of wine, linens, and what looked like a goddamn chocolate fondue machine. Next to it, a portable stage was being assembled directly in front of the barn. Not beside it, not near it, in front of it. As if the building itself, the one I feed my animals from, the one my grandfather built with his own hands, was now part of the decorative theme. Rustic Americana, Karen called it, when I confronted her. "It's authentic," she said, sipping out of a stainless steel thermos as workers drilled hooks into my siding to hang floral garlands. "We're paying homage to the land." "You mean desecrating it?" I said. She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic, Mark. Don't you understand how important this day is for the bride? She's a public figure's niece. These are people with real influence. You should be honored." I stood there, quiet, cold, watching as 2 of her helpers began laying a burlap runner directly over the main trail path, the one I used to access the aviary. I asked them to move it. They ignored me. I took out my phone and showed them the deed map again, showed them the coordinates, the elevation markers, the lot registration numbers. "That's nice," one of them said, "but Karen's the one who paid us." That night, the eagles stirred, as if they sensed it, the disruption, the violation. Birds like that, bred for precision, for silence, for controlled force, they don't sleep through noise like that. Through strangers stomping through the grass at dusk, snapping twigs, laughing over Bluetooth speakers while someone rehearses their vows in front of my barn. I sat in the shadows, behind the low wall of the sorting shed, and watched it all. The lights, the laughter, the complete erasure of boundaries. Karen had even ordered drone footage. I could hear it buzzing overhead, circling like a mechanical mosquito. I watched it swoop near the orchard, scouting flight paths for aerial bridal video sequences. That's when I smiled. Because the moment a drone crosses a falconry flight path, it becomes a target. And there are few things more satisfying than watching a 2-0 videography drone get snatched out of the sky by a 5-pound Talon with an attitude problem. I didn't even need to release the birds. They do it naturally. All I had to do was give them room. Let them be what they were trained to be. Let them see what didn't belong. 2 nights before the wedding, I received a message on my burner line. The one only 2 people know. The voice on the other end was gravel and bourbon. "You ready?" It was Randall, my old DNR buddy who now managed predator programs in the state wildlife department. I sent him footage of the drone, the pond modification, and the audio recordings of Karen's vendors bragging about harvesting rainwater from the shed gutters to power their decorative lily basins. He laughed so hard he had to mute the call. "You want a federal observer present?" he asked. "Already invited one," I said. "Fish and Wildlife. Should be here day of. You want backup?" "Don't need it." "You deploying?" "Only if they step past the orchard." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You're serious?" "Dead." I hung up. Then I walked the line. Past the orchard. Past the fence. Past the remnants of the old wooden sign my grandfather once carved. "Welcome to Miller Acres," now ripped in half and replaced with a white vinyl banner reading "Wedding of the Year." That was the moment I buried the man who believed in warning shots. Karen didn't want peace. She didn't want resolution. She wanted spectacle. Theater. To dominate my land under the pretense of celebration. She wanted a stage. I'd give her one. I set the timers. I programmed the GPS fence triggers. I adjusted the eagle harness frequencies to respond to motion beacons if manually activated. One flick of my finger, and the eagles would take wing. Trained to avoid people, yes, but not objects, not tents, not plastic chairs. Not unauthorized drones or noise-making speakers or generators buzzing on stolen power lines. They would fly. They would scatter the sky like a biblical omen. And Karen? Karen would learn that some things, some lands, cannot be annexed. Some boundaries aren't just fences. They're lines drawn in the bones of the earth, and she was about to cross the last one. The wedding began at exactly 3:00 p.m., just as the sun hit the ridge and spilled molten light across the orchard, making the pond shimmer like polished steel. The pasture had been transformed into a suburban Versailles. White tents billowed in the breeze like naval sails, tethered to your land by stakes you didn't approve and strung with fairy lights powered by a gas generator illegally siphoning electricity from your barn. You could hear it chugging, guzzling fuel beside your feed bins like a thirsty parasite. A makeshift stage had been constructed, uneven and over the root line of your grandfather's oldest peach tree, where Karen now stood. Clad in a flowing white dress with too many ruffles for its own good, a rhinestone sash tied across her waist like she was about to announce a new HOA amendment by decree. A harpist sat under a rented pergola, plucking a synthetic tune that echoed through portable speakers installed without your knowledge and mounted on the porch railing your father built with his bare hands. Rows of folding chairs lined the aisle, filled with faces you didn't recognize but had learned to despise. Councilman Blake was there, holding a champagne flute. The same Blake who had smirked through every one of your complaints to the county. He waved at you, smug, from across your own lawn. A cluster of HOA board members milled near the drink table, laughing in pastel suits, sipping rosé under parasols like the Civil War never ended. And at the epicenter of it all was Karen, holding a gold-trimmed microphone, beaming like a dictator about to unveil her new statue. "We gather today," she intoned, "on this most blessed land to celebrate not just love, but community." Her voice echoed across your property, like a curse. "This wedding is a symbol of togetherness, unity, and the harmony that only a well-run homeowners association can bring to our lives." That was it. You didn't wait for the applause. You didn't wait for the vows. You stepped into the aviary. You didn't have to say anything. The eagles were already watching. They could feel it. The trespass. The vibration of too many strangers, too much noise, too much synthetic joy pounding through the soil like a drill into their sanctuary. You opened the doors. All of them. 30 trained eagles, black and brown and gold, took to the sky in synchronized silence. Not a scream, not a shriek, just the wind torn open by wings. You walked out into the orchard and raised your hand. Your glove, worn leather and falconry forged, glinted in the sun. You pressed the button on your wrist remote. The signal beacons around the perimeter chirped to life, silent to the human ear, but loud as war drums to the birds above. They pivoted mid-air, shifted into formation, dipped below the tree line like a coordinated unit of aerial snipers. The harpist was mid-bridge when the first eagle ripped the white satin off the altar, sending it fluttering into the pond like a surrender flag soaked in oil. The harpist screamed, tripping over her sheet music as another eagle dove past her shoulder and shredded the paper into confetti. The crowd reacted in waves, first confusion, then awe, then raw, unfiltered panic. Folding chairs tumbled like dominoes as guests leapt to their feet. Someone dropped a tray of champagne glasses, and the crash set off the next wave of screams. One eagle soared down the aisle and tore the aisle runner clean off the grass, taking 2 centerpieces and a fake orchid tree with it. You didn't command them to attack. You didn't need to. They weren't trained for blood. They were trained for territory, and everything they saw was a violation. A man in a designer blazer tried to film the chaos with his phone until an eagle clipped his wrist and snatched it mid-air, carrying it up and over the trees like a trophy. The drone was next. It had been hovering above the wedding tent, capturing sweeping shots of the celebration. 3 eagles hit it in tandem, 1 from above, 2 from the sides. The plastic shell exploded in mid-air, showering Karen's champagne tower with sparks and plastic. It short-circuited her sound system, and the speakers popped once, twice, then went dead. A moment of silence fell, a brief, apocalyptic lull. And then it was Karen herself, standing on the stage, mascara running, veil twisted, screaming, "Somebody call animal control!" Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. But nobody was listening. They were too busy fleeing. Some ran toward the woods. Others climbed into luxury SUVs, scraping the undercarriages on the uneven gravel as they peeled out. A woman in a mauve cocktail dress fainted beside the generator. Someone else dove into the pond. Karen's stage, now half collapsed, caught the hem of her dress and tore it at the waist as she tried to escape, exposing Spanx and a single sequined sock. You stood at the edge of the field, hands folded behind your back, watching as the chaos spread like brushfire. And then, just as you'd planned, the final piece arrived. 2 black SUVs rolled in from the county road, quiet and deliberate. Not local police, not code enforcement, Federal Wildlife Service. Their badges gleamed like courtroom gavels under the sunlight. The first agent stepped out with a clipboard. The second followed, video camera already recording. "We received reports of unauthorized drone usage over protected raptor nesting grounds," the agent said. "Also got tipped off about unpermitted habitat alteration, unauthorized water rerouting, and a possible case of wildlife baiting." Karen, dazed, mascara melting, veil hanging like a wounded flag, pointed at you. "He did this! He's the one with the birds! He trained them to attack us!" The agents didn't even flinch. One pulled a printed folder from the SUV. "Actually, ma'am, we've received formal notice from Mr. Miller's attorney. His birds are legally housed, tagged, and trained under federal conservation protocol. You, on the other hand, have violated no less than 7 wildlife ordinances, including attempting to film and monetize raptor activity without permit, constructing an illegal event space within 500 feet of a protected species nesting zone, and illegally rerouting a freshwater source." "This was my wedding!" she shrieked. "You're making a huge mistake." "No, ma'am," the agent said as he clicked handcuffs over her wrists. "You did." Councilman Blake tried to intervene. "This isn't necessary. I'm sure we can reach some kind of settlement." "You'll have your own hearing," the agent said without looking at him. "And possibly a federal ethics review. You signed 2 of the permits, sir." The news crews arrived an hour later, called by the Wildlife Services Press Department. The local network called it the Wedding War of Willow Ridge. The HOA tried to issue a statement, tried to distance themselves from Karen, but the paper trail said otherwise. Over $1.2 million in fines were levied across a half-dozen members of the board, including Karen. Her accounts were frozen, her property lined. And in a final poetic turn, the HOA was dissolved entirely by emergency vote 3 weeks later. You didn't attend the vote. You didn't speak at any of the hearings. You just sat on your porch, coffee in hand, watching your birds return one by one, circling over the treetops like sentinels coming home from war. They landed in silence, regal, triumphant. And above them, the sun slid behind the ridge, casting the orchard in gold. Karen never returned. Her house sold at auction for 1/3 of its value. The buyer? A wildlife conservancy, which promptly rezoned the lot as protected land. The old gazebo was left to rot. No one moved to replace it. The pond healed. The orchard flourished. And you, for the first time in weeks, slept like the land finally belonged to someone who listened to it. In the end, they didn't just lose a wedding. They lost everything they thought they controlled. The land doesn't forget, and neither do eagles.